I feel like I've caught you doing something. It's okay. Oh. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the State Department. Just one thing at the top, and then I'll get to your questions. I wanted to speak out briefly about the attacks earlier today in Baghdad. Also give an update on Fallujah. The United States strongly condemns the barbaric terrorist attacks in Iraq today that deliberately targeted civilians, killing at least 25 people and injuring many more. We extend our deepest condolences to the victims, families, and friends, and remain steadfast in our support for the Iraqi people in their fight against Daesh. These attacks by Daesh, including the cowardly attack on June 7th in Baghdad and Karbala that targeted dozens of innocent Iraqis celebrating the beginning of Ramadan, are stark reminders of why we must defeat this enemy. The United States will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Iraqi people as they confront and defeat Daesh. Also, just on Fallujah, we commend the progress being made by Iraqi forces on the battlefield. We're encouraged by statements made by Iraqi leaders over the past several days, urging for the protection of civilians who are fleeing Daesh and the pledge to investigate any cases of abuse and to hold violators accountable. The United States and our coalition will continue to provide training and support to the Iraqi security forces so they can continue to defend and protect the Iraqi people. That's it. Matt?
I have one housekeeping thing before
Sure.
we go back to policy, and that is the response to Congressman Chaffetz. Has it happened? Have you
It
sent
has.
it?
Yes, it's been
It's
sent.
been sent. Can you give us a little more clarity about what's in it?
Sure. I mean, I think it's simply, it's at least partially in response to the letter that Representative Chaffetz sent to the Secretary. But it addresses what we know about the incident and what we've been able to determine by interviewing this person, the technician, and also looking at emails and basically giving a laydown of the events as we know them, a timeline, if you will. And then, that's essentially it. And then also speaking to the fact that we have taken steps to make sure this doesn't happen in the future.
What is it that you have determined? Have you gotten any further than what we already know?
No.
What you've already told us?
No.
So there's no new detail
No.
in the letter
No.
that's been sent?
No.
Of course, the
No, not to
congressman
my
had
understanding, no, we did not.
requested. How come?
I think we talked about the fact that we have gone through the emails, but I don't think we felt necessary, and that it was necessary to share those documents with the committee at this point in time.
Are they relevant? Did you find any that are relevant
No.
to this?
No, I mean,
Well,
we
is
said
it-
this. We went through we didn't find any documents, and we're not going to just hand over all of the emails that are, as you said, not relevant to the
Well,
to
but
the
the
investigation.
question is that the reason that you didn't send any documents with
Is that
the
they were
letter
not,
is
yes,
that
they were not
didn't-
relevant to
they
the,
didn't
yes,
have anything
yes,
to do with
thank
it.
you.
Under the email systems, so you said you're looking at emails. Are you looking at both classified and unclassified email systems?
I would assume both. I'll check on that, and I have not gotten an answer about personal emails. I don't believe that's the case,
Oh, you don't believe that you're looking
that we're
at
looking
those?
at personal emails.
And can you, this may be just me that's interested in this, but can you get the names of the email system or systems that you're looking at?
How so? You mean?
I believe there's more than just classified and unclassified, and there are other systems.
Sure, I can see if that's, if
Okay.
there's, if it's, yeah, sure.
Thanks.
And that's gone up to his office just recently in the last couple hours?
Yeah,
Was it yesterday?
Yeah, I believe, you're talking about
Yeah, I'm
Representative
just wondering if he
Yeah.
has had time to respond. I mean, I'll ask him.
I think it was,
You have
it
not
was
gotten-
sent in the last hour or so.
Okay, so you
Yeah.
have not
So it
heard
didn't
back
go
from
yesterday?
him?
No, it did not go yesterday.
Why not?
We're just finalizing it. Dotting i's, crossing t's.
Related to your opening
Yep,
statement on
sure.
the attacks in Iraq, yesterday there was also an attack in Israel, in Tel Aviv. I know that you put a written statement out about it, but do you have anything more to say about that in the same vein as you?
Well, obviously,
Spoke
as
about
you
the
said,
attacks in
and
Iraq.
I'm happy to once again condemn yesterday's terrible terrorist attacks in Tel Aviv. We condemn them in the strongest possible terms. We extend our deep condolences to the families of those killed and our hopes for a quick recovery of those who were wounded in this attack. And as I said in a statement yesterday, these kinds of attacks can never be justified.
On the subject of the attacks,
Yeah.
the defense minister over there, Avigdor Lieberman, has said that in future, Palestinians that are killed while carrying out attacks, their bodies will not be returned to their families. They're going to be interred somewhere that Israel has a cemetery for enemies, I think. Is that something that you're concerned about? Or is that part of the course?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, this is obviously an internal matter for Israel to debate. This is, I think, a couple of thoughts on that. One is that we would just hope that any measures that Israel takes would be designed to not escalate tensions any further. But we certainly respect their desire to express outrage and to protect the safety of their people.
Is that an appropriate way to express outrage, to keep the bodies of the killers?
Well, again, I guess, again, the dynamic here is that we don't want to see any further escalation of tensions. That's something that they obviously should weigh when they consider these kinds of measures.
But you then went on to say that you respected their desire to convey
Well, I'm talking
outrage,
more
and that-
specifically about, frankly, about their reaction, our reaction to their reports that they're going to freeze entry visas, or permits rather, and they're also going to plus up their troop.
Well, that was exactly
yeah.
what I wanted to get to next. I mean, they said that they're going to revoke permits for 83,000 Palestinians, and as you said, that they've said that they're going to send several hundred more troops to the West Bank.
Right.
I mean, are you trying to say in a very delicate way that could increase tensions, which presumably it will, since it makes it harder for people to, work?
I think what I'm trying to say, Arshad, is that we understand the Israeli government's desire to protect its citizenry, or its citizens rather, after this kind of terrorist attack, and we strongly support that right. But we would hope that any measures it takes are designed to, would also take into consideration the impact on Palestinian citizens, or civilians rather, who are just trying to go about their daily lives.
Yeah, well, what about the impact on the victims of this?
I understand that, and
I mean,
which is
I'm
why
not sure exactly how it is that the Israelis are escalating tensions here.
Matt, I'm simply saying
I
that
mean, two guys went into a restaurant.
I understand
just
that, and that's
started
why,
shooting
and
people point
why I
blank.
prefaced my response by saying that we understand their desire to protect their citizens and to send a message. But we would only urge that any measures that it takes be done with the consideration towards the many innocent Palestinians who are simply trying to go about their daily lives.
So what does that mean? Does that mean you frown upon the measures that they are taking and think that they are escalating tensions? Or does this fall into the purview of being an appropriate response to a terrorist
I think
attack?
ultimately, first of all, that's something for the Israeli government to ultimately decide on. I'm just simply trying to give a full sense of the dynamics here, which are that this is going to affect thousands of Palestinian civilians who are, again, just trying to go about their daily lives.
Right. Tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians.
Correct.
But the initial attack affects the lives
Of course, I strongly,
many Israelis.
I understand that as well.
Follow up on
I
this.
strongly
Now,
condemn
the
those
Israelis-
attacks.
Yeah, the
Please.
Israelis thus far are saying that it was an individual. They could not tie it to any particular group and so on. So in this regard, since they said that thus far there is no evidence indicating that they belong to any one group, are you calling on the Israelis for restraint And if, I know you alluded to that in your response to Matt and Ursula. But are you calling on them to sort of refrain from, let's say, vengeful thing against Yatta, the village, which is now completely besieged? They come from a village, in Hebron, where they have been, the village has been subjected to great many attacks by the settlers. Are you calling on the Israelis to refrain or have a restrained response against the village of Yatta or other places in the West Bank?
Saeed, again, and let me be very clear, we condemn yesterday's attack. We completely understand the right of Israeli authorities to ensure the security of their civilians and to carry out measures that they believe will, in fact, provide for that security. I would simply caution, and we've said this before, that in carrying out those kinds of measures, that they do take into consideration the impact on innocent Palestinians and that they exercise restraint.
Have you been in contact with the Palestinian Authority or with the, I know you have probably been in contact with the Israelis on this incident or other possible incidents, on their coordination, security coordination with the Israelis? Weeks back,
Sure.
The head of Palestinian security claimed that they thwarted some like 200 attacks and so on. Are you in touch with them on this issue?
Saeed, I'm not sure that we've been since this attack yesterday, but I know that we're in regular contact talking about these security issues.
Okay, and I just wanted to ask you, Fatah, whose head is actually the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, they issued a statement basically saying that Israel must realize the consequences of its persistence to punish violence, to push violence, and house demolition policies, forced displacement of Palestinians, raised on by Israeli settlers, and so on. So, is that? How do you perceive the statement of this group, which you basically support? You support the authority.
So a couple of things. There were a number of statements yesterday. I think President Abbas made a statement rejecting all violence against civilians, regardless, and I'm quoting here, regardless of their identity and irrespective of the justifications. We certainly support the spirit and the words of President Abbas. We've consistently called on the Palestinians to condemn terrorist attacks, and this incident's no different. There was also a statement by Hamas that we found deeply troubling, that essentially tried to glorify the attack. And there was also a statement, as you mentioned, by Fatah official rather, that saying it was somehow justified. And again, we reject that. There's no justification for these kinds of terrorist attacks.
Saw the statement from Hezbollah.
I believe so, and we
You also have issues with that.
we
yeah?
would, yes.
It's saying,
I think I misspoke. I suggested that the permits that had been canceled were work permits, but they were not. They were to visit relatives.
That's correct, yeah. No, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, it's just entry permits.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mark, can I ask an Israel
Hey,
question?
yes. I see.
Just to,
A question, sorry.
it's an Israel question. I just
Oh,
want to
okay,
clarify
great.
something.
Sure.
A few days ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that he would be open to peace talks based on a revised version of the Arab peace plan. I'm just wondering whether the U.S. would support that or whether it wants the parties to stick to the original version of the Arab peace plan.
It's a fair question. I recall the statement as well. I think, I think in the wake of last week's conference in Paris, and again, Secretary Kerry has spoken to this before. I think we're willing to look at all serious proposals, regardless of, whether they involve a new or somehow revamped proposals, previous proposals rather. Sorry. So I think we're open to any kind of serious effort and intent by Israel or by the Palestinians to, again, start direct negotiations. That's what we're direct talks rather, and that's what we want to see.
Can I just follow up on
Yes, sure,
the
sir.
question? I wanted to ask you if you would comment on this frequency of visits between the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, and the President of Russia, Putin, that it's happening more frequently and so on. Whether this is a result of a waning U.S. influence in the region, as some suggest, or is it basically they're trying to sort of
I can't speak to
show contempt?
I mean, I can't speak to
for
why.
some reaction.
I can't speak to why Prime Minister Netanyahu is engaging more frequently with Russia. I would simply say that we continue to engage with Prime Minister Netanyahu on a weekly basis. I know Secretary Kerry speaks to him frequently. So as long as we're talking, we're not certainly going to restrict their ability. They're a sovereign nation and can speak to whomever they'd like to speak with.
So the administration has for some time said that it is fully supportive of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and potential ratification by the Senate, although it does not going to be ratified by the Senate, at least in its current form. I'm wondering if, in fact, it is still something that the administration is interested in, and I ask this in the context of the fact that there's the anniversary, the 20th anniversary of the treaty coming up on Monday. There is a big meeting where all of the foreign ministers of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council were invited. All of them but Secretary Kerry are going. And although Rose Gottmiller is going for the U.S., I'm just wondering, there was a time not so long ago when you couldn't pry Secretary Kerry out of Vienna or stop him from going there for any reason. And I'm just wondering if CTBT is still an issue of priority for the administration, why it is that he wouldn't be going when his 4 other Perm 5 colleagues are.
I mean, certainly it's still a priority. I don't have anything to announce in terms of Secretary Kerry's travel, but he will be, I think, traveling next week. And I don't have details on why he's unable to make it to Vienna, other than that he has previously scheduled commitments. But I don't.
So this is not any.
This is not kind of signal sending, no.
Signal sending of what?
That we're somehow no longer interested in CTBT.
Syria?
Sure.
Staffan de Mistura said that he's received assurances that Syria will allow aid convoys, I think it's from this weekend, to all 19 UN designated besieged areas. Have you, via the Humanitarian Task Force or the ISSG, received the same assurances? Do you give them any credence? And will there be any consequences for Assad if he does not carry through this assurance?
Sure, sorry, I'm going to cut you off there.
Yeah.
Obviously this is potentially very positive news. But again, as I said yesterday, we're skeptical and we're looking for action. We are, in fact, monitoring the first food delivery since, I think, 2012 to Daraya. And that should take place today. We understand a convoy is already en route, and we hope that the people in Daraya are able to break their Ramadan fast this evening with food from this UN convoy. It is also our strong expectation and hope that all of the assistance that is in this UN convoy will reach Daraya, as well as to other besieged areas. We continue to call on Russia. We continue to call on all ISSG members to uphold the basic principle that it should be the UN who determines what assistance is necessary and what besieged communities should receive that assistance. And we believe that the UN's full request should be met. There's no other standard. This is not something that the regime should be able to somehow edit or provide their own viewpoint on. The UN, we believe, should be the arbiter of these besieged areas and what they should receive. So to answer your question more directly, look, we're cautiously optimistic. Again, we are very hopeful that this delivery will be made to the besieged community of Daraya, and as I said, that they can break their fast with much needed food.
That's Daraya now, but he also talked about the other besieged
Aware
areas.
of that, and again, we'll be looking for evidence that this is being carried out. We're again cautiously optimistic.
Should these
Please.
deliveries, be an incentive to restart the talk, in your view?
Well, I think,
Will they play a role?
I mean, I think it's all, look, we've said there should be no preconditions for talks.
Right, I understand.
But the reality is that with a very spotty ceasefire or a cessation of hostilities, or a cessation of hostilities that we've been seeking to strengthen and reaffirm in many places, and with the fact that the regime is still withholding assistance from reaching these areas, it's hard. It makes it harder for these talks to get back up and running in Geneva. So we would look to any steps taken by the regime and by the opposition, but certainly in this case by the regime, as a way to build a more positive climate. Please.
Did you hear from the Russians why they are not taking actions to?
We've not. No, I don't have anything. I asked that very question today, and we don't have any updates. I would direct you to the Russians, but I don't think they've responded. Please, sir.
On China?
Yep.
Just to follow up from yesterday, have you received any communication from Japan regarding the incursion by the Chinese military vessels near the Senkaku Islands?
Hold on, I don't know that I have an update on that. Apologize. I think I'd still refer you to the Japanese authorities to speak to it. We have been informed, I can report, we have been informed by the situation by the Japanese government. And we're obviously in close communication with them, but I'd refer you to them for any further details.
Mark, can you explain what this situation is in Qatar that led to the ambassador to apologize for the video?
Sure, I'll explain as best I can, I guess. So, perhaps it is an example of the ability of social media to send the wrong message. But my understanding is that there was a video posted during an event, a social event, celebrating the establishment of the Army, the U.S. Army, and apparently that video offended some who saw it, some Qatari citizens who saw it, and Ambassador Smith took it upon herself as ambassador to Qatar to issue an apology on Twitter and also convey in person her apology to the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As to the specific content of the video, it's really a matter for the Department of Defense to speak to.
Okay, but
Yep.
I mean, did you agree that it was offensive?
Do I personally agree, or do I?
Well, did the building
I think
agree?
it's
Did-
not a
did she
matter
do
of,
did she
Matt, I
just-
wouldn't say, so regardless of whether I personally or we, the matter is that people took offense to it. And so as a result, we felt, and clearly Ambassador Smith felt, that it was best to apologize for any misperception or any insult that was conveyed by
All right.
this.
And then just at the very top, you said
Sure.
it's an example of the ability of social media to send the wrong message. Well, I mean, social media doesn't send the wrong message on its own. Someone's got to actually actively put it up there, right?
Of course.
So,
All I'm
do you
saying is,
know-
we all need to be conscious of what we put out on social media. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Have a follow-up on this
Sure thing, please.
as well.
Yeah.
You said she took it upon herself to apologize in person. Did she take it upon herself, or was she summoned by the Qataris?
No, my understanding is that she issued on Twitter and conveyed in person an apology to the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I don't believe that. I think she did this voluntarily and on her own volition.
Made an appointment to go see.
That's my understanding. That's my understanding.
Can we go to the Fallujah, where you started at the top?
We can go to Fallujah.
Okay.
Sure.
First of all, could you give us an update of what's going on? And second, there seems to be like some sort of a campaign to aid the Sunnis, quote unquote, in Fallujah, in places like Saudi Arabia and other places. A spokesman for the Ministry of Interior in Saudi Arabia says we cannot stop people's sentiments and so on. Are you concerned, or would you take this up with the Saudis?
I'm sorry, but just I missed it. You're saying
Two
it
things.
seems to be
First of
a,
all,
yeah,
if you
sorry,
can give us
sorry.
an update,
Yeah,
and then I'll follow up with the
okay.
other one.
Sure thing, hold on one second. Apologize. My book has grown too large. So as I think I said yesterday, Iraqi forces are making progress, they're advancing on the city. You know, I obviously refer you to the Iraqi authorities to speak more about what progress has been made. I do know that, and I think I'm speaking to maybe your second question, but you know, we are concerned about the plight of civilians who are fleeing Fallujah, and I spoke about this yesterday. Our understanding is that ISIL or Daesh is holding tens of thousands of civilians hostage and under terrible conditions. Iraqi security forces are trying to screen those who are fleeing the city to ensure that Daesh fighters are not hiding among these innocent civilians. And it's difficult work, but we expect it to be conducted in a way that respects human rights and the safety of these civilians who are fleeing the fighting.
And it seems that the Fallujah battle is stirring, you know, or more polarizing the Sunni Shia schism. And in fact, in places like Saudi Arabia and other Sunni-dominated countries are collecting contributions and money and so on being sent. Some fear that it might find its way to ISIS, or others fear that it will only exacerbate this
Sure.
you know, sectarian schism.
Well, and we've, again, talked about this the last couple of days. I mean, look, we're obviously aware of the underlying dynamics and tensions inherent to this assault or this offensive to retake Fallujah. You know, we understand Prime Minister Abadi has opened safe passageways for civilians to be able to escape. We've talked a lot about messages from Prime Minister Abadi as well as Ayatollah al-Sistani's message that Iraqi security forces involved in this offensive should protect civilians and civilian properties. We are troubled by reports that civilians in Fallujah and the surrounding area have been subjected to torture or abuse, and in, I think, some cases even murder. I know Prime Minister Abadi has pledged to investigate all credible reports and hold those accountable, the perpetrators. He's issued clear instructions to Iraqi security forces, including the popular mobilization forces, to protect civilians and respect their human rights. And we firmly support this approach. I think that, you know, the Iraqi government is saying the right things, pledging to do the right things, and we're obviously working closely with them to ensure that they follow through.
Finally, are you troubled by reports that suggest that Iranian General Qasem Soleimani is giving personal advice or field advice personally to Prime Minister Abadi on how to conduct the Fallujah battle? Are you aware of those reports?
I mean, look, this offensive, we've seen the reports, certainly, and I'm acknowledge that we've seen them. We're not in a position to confirm any of these images as accurate. We don't know about his travel schedule or where he is. I have to refer you to Iranian authorities to speak to that. The Fallujah operation, though, writ large, is under the command and control of the Iraqi government, and we refer you to them to answer any questions about that. But this is a large-scale operation involving, tens of thousands of Iraqi forces, and with the support of these popular mobilization forces. And thus far, It's a difficult fight. It's a long fight. As we talked about, there's, we're watching closely reports of credible reports of abuses on civilians, but thus far, we're hearing the right things from the Iraqi government. Please. Yeah.
Thank you. Mark, day before yesterday, Turkish president signed constitutional amendment to remove immunity from MPs at parliament.
That's right.
Most of them involved with the Kurdish MPs. A couple of weeks ago, you stated your concerns about what would happen if this happened. So now the president signed. I'm wondering if you have any comment on this.
Just say, again, that we're very concerned that this amendment will have a chilling effect on freedom of speech across Turkey. Look, it's a common tenet in democratic societies that, or rather a common tenet is equality before the law. We believe that the freedom to engage in free speech and political speech is or should be rather protected under the law. And this certainly involves speech by elected representatives of a country's citizens. So we're going to continue to closely monitor it. We're going to express our concerns with the Turkish government. Please, sir. Yeah, of course.
According to today's news report, the Pentagon has dispatched a second carrier to the Mediterranean. A, can you confirm? Second, can you tell us what it is behind that unusual step?
Unusual of having two carriers in the...
Yeah, it's been more than 20 years. The Navy hasn't had two carriers in the same time in the Mediterranean.
I honestly, I've not seen those reports. I'd have to refer you to the Pentagon to confirm them. And as to the reason behind them, again, they can speak to the overall strategy and the mission of these particular carriers. I don't have anything to offer.
Is it related to what's taking place in Syria and Iraq as they report?
I would be, I just can't conjecture to why those two carriers in the Mediterranean, if they are indeed, I just don't have that information in front of me.
Mark, can I follow up again, sorry, on the China Senkaku issue?
Yeah.
So you can't shed any kind of light on the communication between you and the Japanese government?
I can't, I'm sorry, what was your question? I can't shed
any more light on like the details, the content of the communication between the Japanese government and this building?
No, I mean, look, I mean, we're, obviously, Japan is a close partner and ally. They have informed us about the situation. Our position on the Senkakus is longstanding. We don't take a position on the question of ultimate sovereignty of the islands, but we do acknowledge that they've been under Japanese administration since, I think, 1972. And as such, we believe they fall within the scope of the U.S.-Japan Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security. We're obviously always concerned by these kinds of reports. It's something we watch closely and we'll continue to consult closely on with the government of Japan.
Are there any steps that you're looking to take?
Not at this point, no. I don't believe so.
And finally, sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
do you think that this incursion is a direct response to U.S. freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea?
Look, I mean, we just left the SNED in Beijing, where, again, we had a very full and frank conversation with the Chinese about our commitment to freedom of navigation. That's not something we're going to shy away from. We've been very plain spoken about it. We believe it's within our rights and within international law, and we're going to continue to carry out these kinds of operations. As to whether this is related to that, we hope not, but we can't conjecture. Yes, sir. Yep, you.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Yes, sir.
I have a question about Eritrea.
Yep.
The Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea held a press conference yesterday to report its findings to the media. The Commission of Inquiry says, I quote, the Commission has conducted that Eritrean officials have committed crimes against humanity. Their crimes of enslavement, imprisonment, forced disappearance, torture, persecution, rape, murder, and other inhuman acts have been committed as part of a widespread and systematic campaign against the civilian population since 1991. And also, if you remember, the State Department also released its own human rights report on Eritrea. So what is the U.S. reaction regarding this new report from the United States?
Well,
from the United Nations?
Sure. We're reviewing I think it's the second report of the UN Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea. We're concerned by the Commission's assertion that there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in Eritrea since 1991. We have, as you know, repeatedly expressed grave concern about the human rights situation overall in Eritrea, and the findings of the Commission only, I think, reinforce our concerns. We continue to support international efforts to improve respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms in Eritrea.
And a quick question. The Eritrean government and its supporters rejected the report, claiming that it's politically motivated. Do you think it is?
Again, we're reviewing the report. The concerns or the allegations it raises are concerning to us. And I think we would encourage the government of Eritrea to honor its commitment to return the duration of natural, there's several steps that they can take, let's put it this way, to address some of the concerns about human rights. One, they can return the duration of national service to 18 months. They can also develop an independent judiciary, and they can also release persons who've been arbitrarily detained, and that includes journalists and members of religious groups. So we would urge them to take action to improve the overall human rights situation in Eritrea. So you had a question?
Just speaking of UN reports, the Secretary General has come out and essentially acknowledged that the Saudis threatened to cut off tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in funding to various UN organizations and programs unless they were removed from this this report on children. Is this kind of thing that's acceptable to you?
So
Sure.
we have seen his comments. We share his view, the Secretary General's view, that the report describes, quote, horrors that no child should have to face, end quote. And we believe that it's important that the UN be permitted to carry out its responsibilities pertaining to human rights and the protection of children without fear of reprisals.
Okay, so that means that you do not think that what the Saudis did was appropriate?
Again, we've seen his comments. We've seen reports about countries, governments, Saudis threatening to cut off funding.
Is that an okay way to get your way at the UN?
Well, again, I think it's, we agree with the Secretary General that the UN should be permitted to carry out its mandate, carry out its responsibilities without fear of, money being cut off.
All right. Well, I mean, one of the reasons that I asked this is there's pretty standard diplomatic procedure, pretty standard behavior of nations, including the United States.
I'm aware of our own track record.
To cut off funding to UN organizations if it doesn't do, or if it does do things that it doesn't like. So why is it not hypocritical for you to raise an eyebrow or say that what the Saudis did is wrong when this government, through multiple administrations and sometimes required to by U.S. law, threatens the UN, on an almost daily basis?
Again, I'm speaking to this very specific report that pertains to protection of children. And, I would say that our focus is on the way forward, which is that the Secretary General has invited the Saudis, the coalition, I think, to send a team to New York to talk about the report and to work through it. And we would certainly strongly urge the Saudis and others to participate in that process. I said I fully acknowledge our own track record regarding the withholding of funds. That said, the UN should be able to carry out its mandate and also carry out its ability to report objectively on on these kinds of issues without fear of reprisal.
Well, does that mean that you are willing to ignore U.S. law and fund UN organizations that?
I'm speaking about this specific incident. I'm speaking about this specific issue and this specific incident.
So it's inconsistent. You're acknowledging an inconsistent U.S. position. Yeah?
I'm acknowledging that we in the past, for different reasons, have withheld funds, yes.
Was it appropriate for the UN to have removed the Saudi-led coalition from this blacklist in the face of these threatened reprisals?
Look, I'm not going to second guess the UN's decision and the Secretary General's decision. It's up to him to explain and defend his rationale for doing so. But I think, again, he has offered a way forward here, which is that it's to sit down with the Saudis, to look at the report, and to ensure that it accurately reflects the situation.
So do you expect that if one to review it, then because your counterpart at the
I'm not going to
UN,
prejudge the
Stefan
outcome.
Dujarric, said that
Yeah.
this is, we are going to review it.
I'm aware of
So-
his comments, but I'm not
Okay.
going to prejudge what the outcome of this process may be.
Have you had any direct contact with the Saudis about this issue?
A fair question. I'm not sure. Probably through our UN, but if through our mission in the UN, but I'd have to confirm that. Please.
Why the secretary canceled his visit today to Jeddah?
Oh, that was just simply, I think, scheduling problems. I don't think he could get the meetings he wanted.
I got two very
Sure.
brief ones.
Yeah, and then I got to step. Yeah.
Both have to do with
course.
LGBT issues.
Okay.
One is there's going to be a march, Pride Week march in Ukraine, Kiev, I believe this weekend, and there's been some threats to it. You are probably aware that there was some violence at previous ones, but one have been canceled. I know that Randy Berry was just there. Have you guys expressed any concern to the Ukrainian authorities about this? About the threats?
You know, Matt, I just don't have the, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that we've sent a consistent message about LGBT rights and the rights for citizens to peacefully march and demonstrate. I don't know specifically if we've
And
conveyed
then
our
there's
concerns
some
about this.
There's some legislation
I'll check.
in Moldova that is causing some concern. Do you know anything? I believe it's similar to the Russian propaganda law.
Okay.
If you
I'll
don't
check on
have
that as well.
anything, can you-
Yeah, I'll check. Fair enough. I don't have anything in front of me. Thanks, guys.